Ellis's podcast or any of that. I branched off something that he had preached on the other day. It hit me, and I really liked how it came, and I'm just going to kind of go with it, not necessarily my own direction, but in my own words. So my title is There's Bread in Bethlehem, and it's the gracious glory of God shown through his kindness to Naomi and Ruth. So I'm going to start off by reading Ruth 1, verses 1 through 5. And I'm going to stop part of the way through because there's notes that in this app that I really liked as well. So now it came to pass when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. So the term "now it came to pass in the days" occurs 5 times in the Bible, and it always denotes impending trouble, and it's followed by a happy deliverance. The other ones would be Genesis 14:1, Esther 1:1, Isaiah 7:1, Jeremiah 1:3, and then here in Ruth 1:1. And the name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife was Naomi, and the name of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judah, and they came into the country of Moab and continued there. And Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. And they took them wives of women of Moab. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. And they dwelled there for about 10 years. And Mahlon and Chilion died also, both of them, and the woman was left her 2 sons and her husband. So Naomi goes into Moab, and in this time of famine, they, on an act of faith, they all went to a country that was altogether different than what they were used to. And in that country, in the book of Numbers, the king of Moab was Balkan, and he actually hired a guy named Balaam to curse the Israelites. So the king of Moab tried to curse the Israelites, and here's these people looking for refuge going into a country that obviously had an issue with them in the first place. But God being himself, he changed the words that were coming out of Balaam's mouth, and he made it a blessing to the Israelites instead. So it's just kind of a sign of what a great knowing God that we have, that he was able to take something that was meant for the worst and change it into something for the best. During the time in this country, Naomi, who in a 4-chapter book that's named after somebody else, there's a lot focused on Naomi throughout this book. And she lost her husband. That's a crushing blow in a day when women were not treated very equally by any means, and especially in a foreign land where they were likely outcasts. Luckily, her 2 sons had married Moabitess women, so there was kind of a gap or aid to the cultural gap there. There was something to kind of help with the difference in things. And as I just read, the next punch came in an unexpected when she lost both her sons and she was left with just her 2 daughter-in-laws. And with perfect timing somehow, with the timing of her sons passing and the fact that she was there now with just the 2 Moabitess daughter-in-laws, somehow word had made it all the way from Bethlehem to a widowed woman, a surviving mother whose sons had passed, that there was no longer famine and God had put bread back in Bethlehem. And Bethlehem itself, the word, and I've spoke on this before, means the house of bread. And in the house of bread, there was refuge. Naomi, at this point, the theologians estimated her around 80 years old. I'm not even 40 years old yet. I hate moving. I'm to the point where I will hire 2 men in a truck and sit down, drink coffee, and watch them do it. But at 80, she decided she was going to uproot and go home. She wanted her daughter-in-laws, who have always been good to her, to stay with their people because it's what they knew. And she didn't know what she was going back to. She didn't know if she was going to be able to do anything for them. And in that, Orpah took Naomi up on this. Naomi kisses Orpah, tells her goodbye. Orpah goes back to her mother and her home, and then her gods, I doubt she took God, the God of Israel, back into Moab with her. to stay with people who didn't actually worship the same God. And even though she had kind of known this was going to happen, Naomi didn't have a bad attitude about it. She blessed her. She said, God be with you, take care of you, and kissed her and headed on her way. But she had also went to tell Ruth the same. And with Ruth, instead of Ruth actually walking away and going back to the people of her own culture, Ruth had clung. The word was clave in the Bible, but she had clung on to her and told her basically until the day that she was dead, she would stand by her side. And even in this, I believe she said word for word that she would be buried next to her. Naomi, with her newfound bitterness, kind of with everything that was going on, she tried to push Ruth away. She tried to tell Ruth, look, Orpah's already gone. You don't need to go with me. It's okay. Go ahead and you go your own way, even though Ruth was stuck to the idea that she was going with her. I know that a lot of us in our own bitterness has probably pushed blessings, or at least attempted to push an attempted blessing away. Something that was going to be good for us, yet we were not willing to take it because we were so upset about something that we should just let pass on. Seeing that she wasn't going to sway Ruth, they came back to Bethlehem. And in their return, when she got back, people addressed her. People said, hey, isn't that Naomi, Elimelech's wife? And she said that she may have left Bethlehem as Naomi, which the word means sweet. But when she came back, she was no longer sweet because the Lord had dealt with her bitterly, and she was now Mara, which translated over to bitter. In Ruth 19 or 1:19 through 20. I was gonna hit that. So they went until they came to Bethlehem, and it came to pass when they were come to Bethlehem that the whole city was moved about them. And they said, is this Naomi? And she said unto them, call me not Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I'm just reemphasizing a point. This thing's fancy. Sorry. What wasn't known was there was still kin to Elimelech left in Bethlehem, a man named Boaz, who was a man of wealth. He was a man of faith, and unknown to Naomi and Ruth, he was the kinsman redeemer waiting in the midst. They had arrived, and when they had, it was the beginning of barley season. Why was it important that it was the beginning of barley season? Because we don't want to come in halfway through God's blessing. We want to be there at the start and be there for the whole thing. Ruth, making sure that she and her mother didn't starve, wanted to make sure that they were well taken care of, began to glean corn after the ones reaping the crop. She began to pick up crumbs, essentially. She was picking up the leftovers that they had missed. And Boaz finds out, he gets curious who this Moabitess woman is in his field, and he finds out that it is the daughter-in-law of Kin. It was of Elimelech's son's wife. And he tells her to stay there gleaming in the fields, and he had the reapers leave extra handful of corn behind because God's always going to provide enough for us. And then his mindset was, if they're going to be here to work hard to be able to gain what they can, I'm going to leave a little extra there so that way they're not struggling. And Ruth, underneath the coaching of Naomi, and I'm using this word loosely, but she seduces Boaz. And she goes into the threshing floor one night, lays at his feet. It was nothing inappropriate, but she made an advance, basically, in today's terms, to show interest, to show, hey, look, I'm available. So they end up falling in love, but they wanted to do things the right way. Boaz knew that there was a nearer kinsman to Elimelech. So the proper way to go about things was that Naomi was going to sell the land of Elimelech, and for that to happen, the nearest kinsman had first rights to the property and the things thereon, including Ruth. So he found the kinsman, and it's funny how God straightens paths. Some things just fall into order the way they should. And the nearer kinsman, he didn't want the parcel and couldn't take on Ruth as a wife because he didn't want to lose his own inheritance. So for that to be going on, Boaz was next in line, which ultimately set up something that God's long-term plans for mankind, for all of us, had to come into effect. Boaz marries Ruth, and they became prominent in Bethlehem as a wealthy couple. And Naomi was not left out of this. She was well known in Bethlehem. They took good care of her as the mother-in-law. And Boaz and Ruth end up having a son. That son's name was Obed. And later in life, Obed had a son, and that man's name was Jesse. Now, Jesse had 8 sons, the youngest of which was a scrawny little shepherd boy. And that shepherd became the anointed king who slays bears, lions, and giants. That's King David himself, and he was the great grandchild of Ruth and Boaz. But if you read into chapter 1 of Matthew through the begots, which it's the begots. I mean, I'm sure we've read through it, but at the same point, how much have we gained through it? You learn that 28 generations later in the begots, you learn that because of Ruth's relationship with Boaz, we get King David, which keeps going down the line, and next thing you know, 28 generations later is the birth of the King of Kings, Jesus Christ himself. Now, if Ruth were to stay in Moab, if the misfortune of Naomi's sons and husbands never happened, if bread hadn't returned to Bethlehem, and if Ruth didn't glean in that particular field, if Boaz didn't see it fit to take care of a widow of his kin, and if a near kinsman didn't pass on the properties of Elimelech, and if Ruth and Boaz didn't bear the sons of the world, or bear a son, the world may be different today than what we know it. To me, that says that God, in all his majesty, shows that he can make great things come out of our valleys, out of our misfortunes. There could be things going on behind closed doors that we don't know until it comes to fruition. And hold the line and stay true to our almighty creator, and we may be the very reason that bread returns